Imagine standing alone on the deck of a dark wooden ship just after sunset. The sea is unusually calm. The wind has almost disappeared, leaving only the slow creaking of timber and the gentle sound of water brushing against the hull. Somewhere beyond the fading horizon, another vessel has been spotted. No cannon has fired. No flag has been raised. Yet every sailor aboard knows that within the next few hours their lives may change forever. The strange thing is that the ship drifting silently through the evening mist is not called the Black Pearl. In fact, no pirate captain in the Great Age of Piracy ever commanded a vessel by that famous name. And yet the legend of the Black Pearl feels so believable that millions of people imagine it, as if it truly sailed the Caribbean, its black sails catching the moonlight, while frightened sailors whispered stories of a ghostly pirate ship that could appear without warning. But history has a curious way of hiding the truth inside fiction. The Black Pearl, as most people know it today, was created for storytelling. Yet behind that unforgettable vessel lies a fascinating collection of real ships, real captains, dangerous waters, and extraordinary lives that were every bit as dramatic as the legends. The true history is quieter than the movies in some ways, yet far stranger in others. It is a story of empires chasing wealth across oceans, of merchants carrying fortunes in their cargo holds, of sailors who spent months without seeing land, and of desperate men who discovered that piracy could seem more appealing than honest work. Tonight, we are not simply chasing a fictional pirate ship. We are searching for the real world that made such a ship feel possible. Before we begin our voyage, I would like to welcome you back. If you enjoy these slow journeys into the forgotten corners of history, consider leaving a quiet like and subscribing whenever you feel these stories have earned a place in your evenings. And if you happen to be listening from somewhere far away, perhaps tell us your city and the local time where you are. There is something comforting about imagining people scattered across different continents, all settling into the same tale beneath different skies. Now allow yourself to get comfortable. Let your breathing slow. Let the room become a little quieter. The busy hours of the day can wait until morning. Tonight we are sailing into the Caribbean during the age when maps were incomplete, fortunes crossed dangerous seas, and the line between sailor, privateer, and pirate was often thinner than anyone cared to admit. Long before pirates became characters in adventure stories, the Caribbean was already one of the most valuable regions on Earth. From above, the islands appear almost peaceful. Emerald forests rise above white beaches. Coral reefs glow beneath clear blue water. Gentle trade winds carry warm air across hundreds of islands scattered between North and South America. It is difficult to imagine that this beautiful sea became one of the most contested places in history. Yet beauty often attracts ambition. When European explorers crossed the Atlantic at the end of the 15th century, they found not empty lands, as many later maps misleadingly suggested, but islands already home to thriving indigenous communities. For generations, people had fished these waters, cultivated crops, traded between islands, and built societies closely connected to the rhythms of the sea. Everything began to change after the arrival of European powers. Spain moved first, establishing settlements and claiming enormous territories. Soon ships loaded with silver from the mines of the Americas began crossing the Atlantic toward Europe. Gold, sugar, tobacco, dyes, spices, hardwoods, and countless other valuable goods followed similar routes. Every successful voyage strengthened Spain's empire and filled royal treasuries. Naturally, other kingdoms watched with growing envy. England wanted a share. France wanted one too. The Dutch Republic sought profitable trade wherever it could find it. Even smaller powers searched for opportunities hidden among the crowded shipping lanes. And beneath all of this, something much larger was beginning to move. The Caribbean was transforming into a crossroads of global commerce. Hundreds of ships traveled between Europe, Africa, and the Americas in an enormous network that historians now describe as the Atlantic world. Goods flowed in every direction. So did soldiers, missionaries, merchants, settlers, enslaved Africans, government officials, craftsmen, adventurers, and sometimes fugitives seeking a second chance. The sea itself became a highway. Imagine standing in a busy Caribbean harbor around the year 1700. The air smells of salt, tarwood smoke, tropical fruit, and freshly cut timber. Dockworkers shout across crowded wharves while barrels are rolled toward waiting ships. Sailmakers repair torn canvas beneath the bright sun. Blacksmiths hammer glowing iron into anchors and nails. Merchants negotiate prices in several different languages. Church bells ring somewhere beyond the warehouses. Chickens wander freely between crates of sugar and rum. Every arriving vessel carries news. Perhaps a war has begun in Europe. Perhaps a governor has been replaced. Perhaps a hurricane has destroyed an important port. Perhaps another treasure fleet has safely reached Spain. Or perhaps a pirate captain has captured 3 merchant ships only a few days away. Rumors travel faster than official letters. For ordinary people living in these ports, uncertainty became part of daily life. That uncertainty shaped every decision. Merchants invested fortunes hoping their cargo would survive storms and raiders. Shipbuilders experimented with faster hulls. Naval officers studied new tactics. Colonial governors worried constantly about defending distant settlements with limited resources. Sailors signed contracts that promised wages but offered no guarantee they would ever return home. Life at sea was rarely comfortable. A wooden sailing ship was a cramped floating village. Below-deck hammocks hung so close together that one sailor could almost touch another without stretching. Fresh water slowly became stale after weeks at sea. Salted meat often spoiled despite every effort to preserve it. Hard biscuits attracted insects. Rats found their own meals wherever they pleased. The smell lingered everywhere. Tar coated the ropes. Sea spray soaked clothing. Smoke drifted from the galley. Wood absorbed years of sweat, salt, and rain. Yet despite these hardships, thousands of men continued choosing life aboard ships. Some dreamed of adventure. Others escaped poverty. Many had no realistic alternatives at all. A sailor's life could be harsh, but life on land was often no easier. This is one of history's quiet contradictions. The pirate stories remembered today usually focus on hidden treasure and dramatic battles. They rarely linger on blistered hands, infected wounds, endless repairs, spoiled food, unpaid wages, or the exhausting labor required simply to keep a ship moving across the ocean. Reality was far less glamorous. And strangely enough, that makes it more fascinating. Because behind every legendary pirate vessel stood skilled shipwrights who shaped each plank by hand. Behind every famous captain stood anonymous sailors climbing towering masts during violent storms. Behind every battle stood months of routine sailing, careful navigation, and patient endurance. Even the fastest ship could not outrun bad weather. The Caribbean-esque climate rewarded confidence one day and punished it the next. Calm seas could suddenly darken beneath towering storm clouds. Hurricanes arrived with terrifying force, breaking them. The first hints of this new way of life did not arrive with thunder or cannon fire. They appeared quietly, almost unnoticed in the choices of ordinary sailors. A crewman who had gone months without proper pay might accept an offer from a pirate captain. A navigator abandoned after a naval battle might join whichever ship offered food and a place to sleep. A carpenter stranded in a distant port might discover that pirates valued his skills as much as any navy. History has a habit of presenting these decisions as dramatic moments, but many of them were simply practical. Men who lived from one voyage to the next rarely imagined that future generations would remember their world as the Golden Age of Piracy. They were thinking about tomorrow's meal, the next storm, or whether they would survive another crossing. And this is where the story becomes even more interesting. The Black Pearl is remembered as a ship unlike any other, swift enough to outrun almost every enemy and mysterious enough to inspire fear before a battle had even begun. Yet the real captains who inspired such legends understood something much simpler. The fastest victory was often the one that required no fighting at all. A merchant captain who believed escape was impossible might surrender without firing a single cannon. Fear could be more valuable than gunpowder. This was not a discovery unique to pirates. Throughout history, armies and navies had relied upon reputation as carefully as they relied upon weapons. A fortress believed to be unconquerable discouraged attack. A famous general frightened opponents before the first battle. At sea, a notorious pirate flag fluttering above the horizon could have the same effect. The black banner that later generations called the Jolly Roger was never completely standardized. Some displayed skulls. Others showed skeletons, swords, bleeding hearts, or hourglasses. Every symbol carried a message. Time is running out. Death is close. Resistance will be costly. The purpose was psychological before it was decorative. Hollywood would later transform pirate ships into floating fortresses armed with endless rows of cannons, but reality demanded compromise. Every additional cannon increased weight. Every heavy gun required trained sailors to load and fire it. Every extra pound slowed a ship that depended entirely upon wind. Successful pirate captains often preferred speed over overwhelming firepower. That mattered more than audiences sometimes realize. Imagine a narrow vessel slicing across brilliant blue water beneath a steady trade wind. Her sails are stretched tight, her crew moving with practiced efficiency. She does not seek a fair fight against a heavily armed warship. Instead, she searches for isolated merchant vessels, damaged ships, or convoys separated by weather. Victory depended upon choosing the right target. It was patience as much as courage. Among the many ships that historians believe contributed pieces of the Black Pearl's image, one quality appears again and again. They were admired not because they were the largest ships afloat, but because they were remarkably fast and surprisingly maneuverable. A captain who could decide when to fight possessed an advantage greater than another dozen cannons. That lesson was understood by some of history's most successful pirates. Men such as Blackbeard Bartholomew Roberts, Charles Vane, Samuel Bellamy, and Calico Jack each commanded different vessels during their careers. None sailed a ship literally called the Black Pearl, yet each added another thread to the tapestry from which modern pirate legends would eventually be woven. Their personalities were as varied as their ships. Blackbeard cultivated terror with slow calculation. Contemporary accounts describe him weaving smoking fuses into his beard before battle, creating the appearance of a man surrounded by fire and smoke. Whether every story was entirely accurate remains uncertain, but the image itself became powerful. A frightened opponent is easier to defeat than a confident one. Bartholomew Roberts, by contrast, developed a reputation for discipline unusual among pirates. According to surviving accounts, his crews followed written articles that established rules governing compensation behavior and the sharing of captured goods. These were not perfect democracies, but pirate crews often operated differently from traditional naval vessels. Captains could sometimes be removed. Loot might be divided according to agreed shares. Compensation existed for injuries suffered during battle. Such arrangements seem surprising, yet they reflected practical necessities. A pirate captain depended upon willing followers. Leadership required confidence more than noble birth. History rarely moves in straight lines. The same communities capable of remarkable cooperation also committed theft, violence, and intimidation. Romantic images of freedom should never hide the suffering inflicted upon captured crews or coastal settlements. Piracy disrupted trade, spread fear, and occasionally ended lives with brutal efficiency. The reality was complicated. It always is. For ordinary merchants, piracy represented uncertainty woven into every voyage. Families waited months for ships that never returned. Investors watched fortunes disappear beneath storms or into pirate hands. Harbor officials recorded missing vessels with growing frustration, unable to determine whether they had sunk, been captured, or simply vanished beyond the horizon. Some mysteries remain unsolved even today. Scattered across the Caribbean seabed lie the remains of countless wooden ships. Coral has grown over cannons. Fish swim through shattered hulls. Anchors rest silently beneath layers of sand where desperate sailors once struggled to save their vessels from sinking. Many wrecks have never been identified. Others preserve extraordinary glimpses into forgotten lives. Archaeologists working beneath the sea recover objects that rarely appear in dramatic pirate. The objects lifted from these silent wrecks rarely look dramatic at first glance. A cracked clay pipe, a rusted spoon, a worn leather shoe with its sole almost gone, fragments of rope hardened by centuries beneath the sea, a chipped bowl that once held salted stew. They are humble things easy to overlook beside glittering coins or polished weapons. And yet these ordinary possessions tell us something the legends often forget. They remind us that every famous ship was above all else a home. For weeks, or even months, dozens of men slept, ate, argued, laughed, worried, and dreamed aboard those floating wooden worlds. They celebrated birthdays they rarely recorded. They mourned friends whose names have vanished from history. They watched unfamiliar stars rise above unfamiliar oceans, wondering when they might finally see land again. The Black Pearl of fiction seems almost alive, as though the ship itself possessed a spirit. Surprisingly, real sailors often spoke about their vessels in much the same way. Ships were given names, personalities, and even tempers. Some captains believed a vessel could be lucky. Others quietly feared that certain ships carried misfortune. Crews noticed every strange sound, every unexplained crack in the hull, every sudden change in the wind. A broken mast at the wrong moment could become the beginning of a story retold for generations. Whether those beliefs were true mattered less than the fact that people believed them. The sea encouraged superstition. A sailor could master ropes, charts, and sails, yet still find himself powerless before a hurricane. In a world where survival depended upon forces no one could control, rituals offered comfort. A lucky coin tucked into a pocket, a familiar prayer whispered before dawn, or an old tale about a haunted reef helped sailors feel that the vast ocean was, if only slightly, more understandable. And beneath these quiet traditions, another transformation was taking place. The great age of piracy was already beginning to fade. For a time, it had seemed that the Caribbean belonged as much to pirates as it did to kings. Merchant ships sailed cautiously. Colonial governors worried constantly about attacks. Naval officers hunted elusive captains who seemed to disappear among hundreds of islands and hidden coves. But powerful empires learned from their mistakes. England, France, Spain, and the Dutch Republic gradually strengthened their navies. Convoys became better protected. Coastal defenses improved. Intelligence networks expanded. Governors who had once tolerated piracy when it weakened rival empires now received orders to eliminate it. The world was becoming more organized. And organized governments rarely leave much room for independent outlaws. One by one, famous pirate captains disappeared. Some died in battle. Some were captured and brought to trial. Others accepted royal pardons, hoping to exchange dangerous freedom for uncertain peace. A few simply vanished from the historical record, leaving behind questions that historians still debate. The end came not through one decisive battle, but through slow pressure. Safe harbors became fewer. Supplies became harder to obtain. Friends became informants. Former allies accepted rewards for betrayals. The sea that had once promised opportunity gradually became a trap. It is a quieter ending than many films prefer, yet perhaps a more human one. History often ends not with a single dramatic moment, but with countless small changes that slowly close every possible escape. And still the story survived. Long after the last famous pirate ships disappeared from the Caribbean, sailors continued sharing tales in waterfront taverns. Travelers carried those stories across oceans. Writers added details that listeners wanted to hear. Dangerous men became colorful rogues. Grim realities softened into adventure. The line between memory and imagination grew thinner with every generation. By the 19th century, readers had begun to hunger for pirate stories unlike the reports written by judges or naval officers. They wanted hidden treasure, mysterious islands, secret maps, daring escapes, and unforgettable captains. Authors happily obliged. One novel inspired another. One legend borrowed from an older tale. Real events blended with fiction until separating them became almost impossible. Then came cinema. On the screen, the pirate ship transformed once again. Its sails became darker. Its speed became impossible. Its captain became larger than life. And eventually, audiences around the world met a ship called the Black Pearl. The vessel seemed ancient yet graceful, frightening yet strangely beautiful. It crossed moonlit seas like a shadow. It represented freedom, danger, mystery, and the irresistible call of the unknown. It felt authentic because it was built from genuine history. Not from one real ship, but from many. From swift merchant vessels that outran storms. From captured frigates transformed into pirate flagships. From weather-beaten sloops that slipped through narrow channels. From naval ships whose designs influenced generations of shipbuilders. From the memories of sailors who described endless horizons and dangerous waters. And from centuries of stories carried by the sea itself. That is perhaps the greatest secret behind the Black Pearl. Its truth does not belong to a single captain or a single voyage. It belongs to an entire age. To understand why the legend continues, we have to look beyond pirates themselves. The Caribbean changed the modern world. Sugar plantations reshaped economies. Atlantic trade connected continents in ways never seen before. The movement of goods, people, cultures, languages, and ideas transformed societies on both sides of the ocean. These changes also carried immense suffering, especially through the transatlantic slave trade, which forced millions of Africans across the Atlantic under unimaginably cruel conditions. Their labor enriched empires while leaving wounds that continued for generations. Piracy existed within this larger world. It did not create it, nor did it escape it. The romantic image of pirate freedom often hides these painful realities. History asks us to remember both: the adventure and the cost, the courage and the cruelty, the dream and its consequences. That balance matters, because history has a habit of flattening people into symbols. The pirate becomes either a fearless hero or a heartless villain. The empire becomes either glorious or entirely corrupt. Real life was rarely so simple. A sailor might be both victim and participant. A governor might sincerely believe he was protecting his colony while enforcing harsh policies. A merchant might finance prosperity in one place while benefiting from suffering in another. People lived within complicated systems they did not fully understand. Perhaps that is why these stories still speak to us. They remind us that every generation believes it understands its own world, only for later generations to discover hidden layers beneath the surface. The Black Pearl survives because it represents something larger than piracy. It represents the mystery of the sea, the hope of distant horizons, the fear of disappearing beyond the edge of the map, the temptation to leave ordinary life behind in search of something extraordinary. Those dreams existed long before pirate ships. They still exist today. Even now, cargo ships cross many of the same waters where pirates once waited behind distant islands. Modern ports stand where old wooden docks once creaked beneath barrels of sugar and rum. Divers continue discovering forgotten wrecks. Historians continue comparing faded maps, handwritten journals, and naval records, searching for answers that may never be complete. Every discovery reveals another small piece of the puzzle, and every answer seems to uncover another question. Perhaps that is the most comforting part of history. It is never truly finished. There is always another document waiting in an archive, another ship resting beneath the sand, another forgotten diary tucked inside an old library, another ordinary person whose quiet life unexpectedly shaped the course of events. The Black Pearl may never have sailed exactly as legend describes, but the world that inspired it certainly did. Its winds were real. Its storms were real. Its fear was real. Its hope was real. And somewhere beneath the Caribbean's shimmering blue waters, the remains of countless forgotten ships still rest in silence, their timbers slowly becoming part of the sea they once crossed. They no longer race beneath full sails or echo with shouted commands. Instead, they keep a quieter company with coral drifting fish and the slow passage of time. Perhaps that is where every great legend eventually returns. Not to perfect certainty, but to memory. A memory shaped by truth, imagination, and the endless curiosity of those who continue asking what really happened. As our voyage comes to its gentle end, the waves grow calmer once again. The horizon fades into darkness, and the wind that carried merchants, explorers, naval officers, and pirates alike becomes little more than a whisper across the water. If you are still awake, thank you for sharing this peaceful journey through one of history's most enduring legends. And if sleep has already begun to find you, then perhaps the sea has done what it has always done best, carrying stories quietly from one shore to another. Until our next walk through the past, let the night remain still, let the ocean drift peacefully in your imagination, and let history keep watch while you finally close your eyes and rest. The sea, however, has a remarkable way of refusing to let a story truly end. Even after the last great pirate captains disappeared from the Caribbean, the ocean continued carrying fragments of their world from one generation to the next. A weathered logbook tucked into an archive, a brass compass recovered from a shipwreck, a faded letter written by a frightened merchant captain describing strange sails on the horizon. None of these objects tells the entire story by itself. Yet together they form something remarkably close to a conversation across 3 centuries. It is easy to imagine history as a collection of dramatic moments, but most of it survives in quieter ways. A clerk dipping his pen into ink before recording the loss of another merchant vessel. A widow waiting months for news that never arrived. A shipbuilder running his hand along a newly finished mast hoping it would survive the next hurricane season. A young cabin boy staring out across the endless Atlantic wondering if home still looked the same. These are not the scenes that usually appear in pirate adventures, and yet they were the foundation upon which every legend was built. One of the greatest misconceptions about the so-called Golden Age of Piracy is that it lasted for centuries. In reality, historians generally place its most famous period between the late 17th century and the early 18th century, a surprisingly brief chapter in the much longer history of the sea. For those living through it, however, it must have felt endless. Every voyage carried uncertainty. Every distant sail demanded careful observation. Was it a friendly merchant? A naval patrol? A privateer with legal permission to attack enemy shipping? Or a pirate flying no flag until the last possible moment? Such uncertainty shaped the rhythm of life at sea. Captains studied the horizon almost constantly. Lookouts remained high in the rigging for hours, scanning the shimmering line where sky met water. At sunrise, the ocean might appear completely empty. By afternoon, 3 unfamiliar ships could emerge from the haze. Distance played strange tricks on the eyes. A harmless fishing vessel could briefly resemble a warship. A damaged merchantman might appear stronger than it truly was. Clouds gathering over the horizon sometimes looked like distant islands that disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. The sea was beautiful. It was also deceptive. Navigation demanded remarkable skill. Modern travelers can cross oceans with satellite systems, detailed forecasts, and precise digital maps. Sailors of the early 18th century possessed none of these comforts. They relied upon the sun, the stars, the direction of the wind, careful calculations, and years of hard-earned experience. A small mistake could carry enormous consequences. A ship only slightly off course might miss fresh water, drift toward hidden reefs, or arrive hundreds of miles from its intended destination. Even experienced captains accepted that absolute certainty was impossible. That uncertainty created opportunities for pirates. They learned the currents. They memorized hidden anchorages. They understood which islands offered fresh water, where reefs protected narrow channels, and how seasonal winds influenced shipping routes. Knowledge became a weapon, sometimes a more valuable one than cannon fire. This is another reason why the fictional Black Pearl feels believable. In the stories, the ship almost seems to know the sea better than anyone else. Real pirate captains often did. Many had spent years serving aboard merchant ships or naval vessels before turning to piracy. They understood charts, weather, tides, and seamanship at a professional level. They were criminals, but many were also exceptionally capable sailors. History can be uncomfortable in this way. It asks us to recognize skill without celebrating the harm done with it. The same hands that expertly repaired a mast might later seize another ship. The same navigator who safely guided a crew through dangerous reefs might also participate in robbery. Human beings rarely fit neatly into simple categories. As the decades passed, governments gradually reclaimed control of the sea lanes. Insurance systems improved. Naval patrols expanded. Ports became more closely connected through faster communication. The world slowly grew smaller. What had once been distant frontiers became increasingly governed spaces. The age that produced the legends of pirates quietly slipped into history. Yet something unexpected happened. As piracy declined in reality, it grew stronger in imagination. Children began reading pirate stories. Artists painted dramatic sea battles beneath crimson sunsets. Theater audiences applauded daring escapes from impossible situations. Novelists discovered that pirates represented freedom from ordinary life, even if that freedom had never truly existed. Each generation added something new. A talking parrot, a buried treasure map, a wooden leg, a mysterious compass, a cursed ship, a black-sailed vessel that seemed almost supernatural. The Black Pearl eventually became the perfect symbol because it gathered all of these ideas into one unforgettable image. Not because it was real, but because it felt as though it could have been. Perhaps that is why it continues to capture our imagination. Legends endure when they contain an emotional truth, even if the details are fictional. The Black Pearl reminds us that beyond every charted coastline lies the possibility of mystery. Beyond every familiar horizon waits another story. And somewhere between fact and imagination, history continues to whisper to those willing to listen carefully. So as the night grows quieter and the sea settles once more beneath the star, imagine that distant silhouette fading into the darkness. Whether it is a merchant ship returning safely to port, a forgotten naval frigate, or the shadow of the legendary Black Pearl itself, hardly matters anymore. Because tonight's journey was never really about one ship. It was about the real people who crossed dangerous oceans, the choices they made, the worlds they connected, and the stories they unknowingly left behind. Those stories still drift across the water, carried by the same winds that once filled the sails of history's greatest ships, waiting patiently for the next listener to hear them.